Good evening, good Shabbat, Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to our service this evening. It is our custom to ask if anybody is here for the first time, and I know we have at least one or two people. Stand up, tell us who you are and where you're from. So welcome. Anybody else? Don't be shy. All right. Let me tell you what to expect this evening. We're going to have our regular service. Then Rabbi Kasdan, who's the chair of our speakers committee, will introduce Dr. Molino. We will hear a talk. We will learn something. Then we will go into the social hall for dinner. So in that order, that sequence. So let us turn to pages 2 and 3, and I call on Dr. Lois Barson for the candle blessing.
O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us to find knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love. Page 6, in the middle of the page, let us pray responsively. May the door of this synagogue be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship. May it welcome cares to unburden, thanks to express, hopes to nurture. May the door of this synagogue be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity. Its threshold be a stumbling block to young or straying feet. May it be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness. May the synagogue be for all who enter, who await the literature and meaning of life. Page 20, L'Chadodi.
Page 28, please rise for the barcode. Praise Adonai, to whom praise is due forever. Praise be Adonai, to whom praise is due now and forever. Page 30. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bidbaro ma'ariv aravim, v'chokhma potech she'arim, uvitbuna mishane etim, umachalif et hazmanim, umesader et hakokavim b'mishmerotehem barakia kertzono. Borei yom v'layla, golel or mipnei choshech v'choshech mipnei or, uma'avir yom umevi layla, uma'avir ben yom uven layla Adonai tziva'ot shmo. El chai v'kayam tamid yimlok aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravim. And let us continue praying together in the middle of 32. Everlasting love, you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, Adonai our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life, and doing them lengthens our days. Never remove your love from us. Praise to you, Adonai, who loves your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. Our God, Adonai is one. Blessed is God's glorious majesty forever and ever. Please be seated. We continue on 36. In the middle of page 39, let us pray responsively. In a world torn by violence and pain, a world far from wholeness and peace, give us the courage to say, Adonai, there is one God in heaven and earth. The high heavens declare your glory. May earth reveal your justice and love. From bondage in Egypt we were delivered. At Sinai we bound ourselves to your way. Inspired by prophets and instructed by sages, time and again we overcame oppressive forces. Though our failings are many and our faults are great, it has been our glory to bear witness to our God, keeping alive in dark ages your vision of a world redeemed. Let us continue to work for the day when the nations will be one and in peace. Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea. Page 42, Ashkiven. Page 44. Those who keep Shabbat by calling it a delight will rejoice in your realm. The people that hallow Shabbat will delight in your goodness. For being pleased with the seventh day, you hallowed it as the most precious of days, drawing our attention to the work of creation. Page 46, please rise for the tefillah. Page 52. Ata kadosh v'shimcha kadosh v'doshim b'chol yom yehalalucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai ha'el hakadosh. Please be seated. In the middle of page 55, let us pray responsively. Disturb us, Adonai. Vex us from our complacency. Make us dissatisfied with the peace of ignorance, the quietude which arises from a shunning of the horror, the defeat, the bitterness, and the poverty, physical and spiritual, of humans. Shock us, Adonai. Deny to us the false Shabbat, which gives us the delusions of satisfaction amid a world of war and hatred. Wake us, O God, and shake us from the sweet and sad poignancies rendered by half-forgotten melodies and rubric prayers of yesteryears. Make us know that the border of the sanctuary is not the border of living, and the walls of your temples are not shelters from the winds of truth, justice, and reality. Disturb us, O God, and vex us. Let not your Shabbat be a day of torpor and slumber. Let it be a time to be stirred and spurred to action. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh HaShabbat. On the top of page 57, Ever-present one, may we, your people Israel, be worthy in our deeds and our prayer. Wherever we live, wherever we seek you in this land, in Zion restored in all lands, you are our God, whom alone we serve in reverence. Baruch atah Adonai, she'otcha levadcha, v'yir'ah na'avot. And on page 59, God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, wonder beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our light within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more we offer thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, atov shimcha, ulecha na'eh lehodot. Page 60, Shalom Rav. Of silent private prayer on pages 62 or 63, or any other prayer as the heart may prompt. Please turn to page 253. Prayers for healing. We pray for all those who are ill, all those who are in danger. Mishaberach avotenu ve'imotenu Avraham, Yitzchak ve'Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel ve'Leah, Hu yevarech et hacholim. May the one who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are ill. Let me mention in particular the following members of our congregational family: Ed Cohen, Joel Lowenstein, Peter Roth, Nancy Freund, Brad Hauser, Joan Horowitz, Stephen King, Bill Sandy, Jacob Bourne, Linda Mack, Dilip Mathur. And we now ask that those of you who have additional names, let us all mention them together. Go ahead. May they all be granted a refuah shlema, an easy and quick recovery. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit. And let us all say amen as we sing together. At the bottom of the page, a prayer of thanksgiving for those who are doing better. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shegemalanu kol tov. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who has bestowed every goodness upon us. And may the one who has bestowed goodness upon us continue to bestow every goodness upon us forever. Page 258, prayers for our community. Source of all being, may the children of this community learn these passions from us: love of Torah, devotion and prayer in support of the needy. May we guide with integrity, and may our leadership be in your service. May those who teach and nourish us be blessed with satisfaction, and may we appreciate their time and their devotion. Bless us with the fruits of wisdom and understanding, and may our efforts bring fulfillment and joy. Baruch atah Adonai she'otcha levadcha b'yir'ah avon. Thus says Adonai, this is what I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of lawlessness, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. Share your bread with the hungry and take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, give clothing and do not ignore your own kin. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand, the evil speech, if you offer compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then your light shall shine in darkness. On page 259, Avinu Shabashamayim Tzur Yisrael v'go'alo barechet Medinat Yisrael Reshit Smichat Geulatenu. We pray for the people of the state of Israel. We pray that the leaders of Israel have the wisdom to make at least the least dangerous decisions in the days ahead. In these very, very difficult times, may we all be protected from despair and discouragement. May we hope and pray for a better day in the future for all. Amen. Let us turn now to page 283, and we call up Dr. Sandra Packard and Louis Moyer to open the ark for Aleinu. Please rise. Seated, and let us continue at the top of page 289, a prayer before the Kaddish. In nature's ebb and flow, God's eternal law abides. When tears dim our vision or grief clouds our understanding, we often lose sight of God's eternal plan. Yet we know that growth and decay, life and death all reveal the divine purpose. God, who is our support in the struggles of life, is also our hope in death. We have set God before us and shall not despair. In God's hands are the souls of all the living and the spirits of all flesh. Under God's protection we abide, and by God's love are we comforted. O life of our life, soul of our soul, cause your light to shine into our hearts and fill our spirits with abiding trust in you. We remember the recently departed Joel Hamovit, Cheryl Costa, Jay Moscow, Beth Munn, Harold Garfinkel, Marvin Morse. We remember those whose yard sites occur at this time: Nathan Benderson, Richard Solomon, Ronald Lebo, Charles Muley, Morton Skirball, James Sloat, Irving Kaplan, Bernard Rottenberg, Michael Veet, Sarah Cantor, Israel Schmirer, Jerome Markstein, Bill Pollack. And again, for those of you who have additional names, let us say them all together at this time. May their memories stay alive in our hearts, our thoughts, and our deeds. And let us turn to page 294. Please rise for the Kaddish. Yit gadal v'it kadash shamei rabbah ve'alma tivrach cherutei ve'amlik malchutei v'chaye echon v'yom echon u'chaye techol beit Yisrael v'galah u'bizman kariv ve'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevarach le'alam u'almei amaya yitbarach ve'yishtabat ve'yitba'ar v'yitromam ve'yaseh V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brechu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata damiran v'alma v'imru amen. Shlam rabba min shamaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imroma, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the source of peace grant peace to those who mourn and comfort the bereaved among us. Let us all say, Amen. Please be seated, and I call on Marion Levine, our co-president, for some announcements.
Welcome. Shabbat Shalom, and boy, how great to see all these seats filled tonight. Hope the season isn't going to end too soon. First of all, I want to tell you that we have a lot to thank for, but to be thankful as I sit here and look at Jake Pollock, back here amidst us, looking years younger. Somebody's taking very good care of him. And to see his young family participate. I took a picture just to show that we have younger people coming to Temple. And for those of you that are celebrating Yahrzeit tonight, friends with their families, I join you because it's a year ago that my brother passed away. And this is our first Yahrzeit for him. And amongst them are two of his very close friends. One is our speaker tonight, and that's how I met Dr. Molino, who's through my brother. And my dear friend Andy Edson, who's joined us tonight also. These are our Bostonians, by the way, and there's more of you back there, I see. So we're all here tonight. Thank you, Rabbi, for a beautiful service, and of course, thank you for Ann to Ann and our beautiful choir. I know many of you come here like I do, just to say it. And by the way, I didn't mean to eliminate anybody, but I think of Nancy all the time, and I'm so glad, David, to see your children here with you. Anyhow, this is wonderful to see everybody here tonight. We have lots of activities. We go on and on and on. I know the season, oh, and by the way, thank you, Lois Barson, our incoming president, for lighting the candles tonight, and to Lou Moya and Sandy Packard for opening the Ark. We will continue. Summer is coming. Many of you are leaving for the north for the summer after Passover, some before Passover. And speaking of Passover, on Wednesday night, the 10th, is the Women's Seder. It is sold out. We have 109 or 10 women, just women, coming to this special Seder. So I hope this becomes a tradition at our synagogue. We have Sunday, our barbecue, Men's Club annual barbecue. There's still room for people to come. We know that North is, speaking of North, it's kind of early, but as Jackie Mason used to say, the Jews are peculiar. They have a peculiar calendar. Some years it's early and some years it's late. This year it's leap year, so we won't be coming back really in full force probably until close to October. There will be another bulletin to tell you more about it. We'll keep in touch with everybody over the summer. It's been a great year for all of us, and we hope to see new members and wonderful faces. And don't forget, there's a meal inside, and I know that's why a lot of you were here. Shabbat Shalom.
I have to add something. In case you are wondering, I really enjoy hearing the voices of young children during a service. It does not bother me in the slightest. Now, it bothers me when people who are significantly older make noise during the service. And it bothered me more than you could ever imagine when my own children squawk during the service. But they, I think, are beyond that stage now. So I'm so glad, I have to reiterate this, you brought the average age down, and we welcome you at all times. I can't tell you how happy I am. Now, we are going to conclude this part of the service with the singing of Hava Nagila. You can find it on page 350. Then I'm going to introduce Rabbi Kasdan, who will introduce our program for this evening. point, I'm introducing Rabbi Peter Kasdan, the chair of our speakers committee, who will introduce the evening. And I'm going to sit down in the congregation so I can see and hear better.
Kelly, where are you, Kelly? Kelly, you want to take care of this for me? Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Shabbat Shalom. On behalf of the Temple Beth Israel Speakers Committee, I want to welcome all of you to our sanctuary on this very special Shabbat. You're in for a real treat, and I'm so happy that Dr. Frances Molino agreed to come here when I first asked her. Marion, thank you so much for making all the arrangements. You and Sam have been wonderful in taking care of our speaker. And Fran, let me just say at the beginning that once you come here and you participate this way at Temple Beth Israel, you become part of our mishpacha. So welcome to the family. It's good to have you. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over Dr. Molino's credentials. Suffice it to say that she is one of the great scholars in our generation, especially when it comes to the history and the present day and even the future of the Jewish community of France. And that's what this weekend is all about. Tonight and again tomorrow morning at our Shabbat morning service beginning at 10 o'clock, Dr. Molino will treat us to the knowledge that resides within her and share with us something about the Jews of France that most of us probably know very little about. I have a friend, a rabbi in France. I know he's having a very difficult time. These times for the French Jewish community are not easy, but we're going to learn a great deal because of our speaker. Now, I have only really met Dr. Molino through the beautiful technology of Zoom and FaceTime. She and I were total strangers until yesterday. Luckily, she got here. For those of you who follow the weather, she comes from Boston. She was supposed to come on Wednesday, but Delta made sure the planes wouldn't fly. And she came in late yesterday, and I know you're exhausted, but I'm glad you had today to relax and to get your feet on steady ground. Dr. Molino comes from a distinguished American Jewish family in Danbury, Connecticut. Her father, Dr. Jerome Molino, was the rabbi there for over 60 years. And I had the privilege of getting to know him when I was a young rabbi in the late 1970s and early 1980s when he was the president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis. He was one of the great orators in the tradition of Rabbi Stephen Wise. Rabbis don't exist like that anymore. When he spoke, people listened. He had a particular tone in his voice. It was a sweet voice, but powerful, and his message was always right on. And so, Fran, it's really good to reconnect with the Molino family here at Temple Beth Israel. Now, we are going to have a Shabbat dinner tonight for those of you who were smart enough to sign up for it. And I promise you that the food will be warm and fresh. It's not going to just lay there and get dried out. We've planned everything just right. I want you to know that this weekend is being sponsored by the Rabbi Sanford Saperstein Memorial Fund. Rabbi Sanford Saperstein was the rabbi here at Temple Beth Israel from 1988 to 1995, I think. Am I right, Michael? Right before you came. And when he passed away, his friends here at Temple Beth Israel, but also at New College where he taught, created this memorial fund specifically to perpetuate Jewish education and Jewish study. He was a great rabbi. He took the word rabbi seriously. It means teacher, and he loved teaching. And so what we're doing this weekend is because of the vision that he brought to this congregation and the love that his students gave back to him. We are living in uncertain times. Tonight, we mark 181 days since the travesty on October 7th in Israel. But we've lived through terrible times for a very long time. And in France, the French Jews also lived through difficult times. The killings at Charlie Hebdo, at the kosher restaurant in Paris, that was a wake-up call for the Jews of France. It's really never been the same for them since then. And so the turmoil that goes on is something we need to know about. And Dr. Molino is going to lead us in that direction, that ongoing madness that we are experiencing today because we are Jews. It's all over the world. Anti-Semitism has raised its ugly head, and we live with it now every day. We live with our grandchildren who are in college. That is perhaps the most frightening of all. Tonight, Dr. Molino will take us on a journey titled The French Revolution, Napoleon and the Jews. Tomorrow morning, she will deal with present-day French Jewry. I hope you're going to be smart enough to come back tomorrow morning for more. There is something very, very romantic about France, and I think we're in for some of that romanticism tonight because our speaker absolutely loves French Jews. It's my privilege, my pleasure to introduce you to my new friend, who I really got to know last night, Dr. Francis Molino.
Phew, I should go home now. That was such a beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. And thank you all, Temple Beth Israel, for inviting me to be your scholar for the weekend. And a special thank you to my dear, dear friend, Marion. And I have to add also, giving away my age quite a bit, but this is the first time I've seen a friend of mine who was a friend of mine in camp when I was a very young girl, and it's 65 years. And she came up to me and said, "Do you remember me?" It's special in a variety of ways. So Peter mentioned the terrorist attacks, and I want to begin with that and then take us back to the 18th century and the French Revolution. And we'll probably end a little bit before Napoleon and pick up there for next time, which would be tomorrow morning. And I want to mention the terrorist attacks in 2015 because the comment by the Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, was really significant. And his comment was, France without the Jews would no longer be France. And he made that publicly. Some of you may remember reading it. And at the time, I thought, well, you know, that's probably a rhetorical flourish. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought that maybe not. And I asked myself, was the Prime Minister actually suggesting that if Jews could no longer live in France, the French Republic did not exist? And if so, if that was what he was suggesting, why? And what role could the Jews have played in the formation of the French Republic? The Jews who were a teeny, teeny, teeny minority in France at the time of the French Revolution. I have to say, however, that this is not the only time the Jews were connected to the French Revolution. The creation of the French Revolution, the cause of the French Revolution, has often appeared in anti-Semitic tropes. The Jews were responsible for the French Revolution. The Jews were responsible for the demise of the Ancien regime. And I'll give you just one example. Some of you may have heard of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a vicious anti-Semitic tract, which you can still, unfortunately, purchase easily. It was written in 1903 and is still in print. And listen to just this quote, which sets up the Jews as causing it. This is a quote supposedly from the Elders of Zion, the Jews themselves. "Remember the French Revolution, which we have called great. The secrets of its preparation are well known to us, for it was the work of our hands," the Jewish hands. "Since then, we have carried the masses from one disappointment to another, so that they will renounce even us in favor of a despot sovereign of Zionist blood, whom we are preparing for the world." So this is quite a powerful statement. Of course, the French Revolution was not the work of the Jews. But there are some important questions that I would like to share with you and answer in the next couple of days. Did the Jews living in France at the time of the French Revolution in 1789, did they play any role? If they were a teeny minority in the creation of the French Republic, and if so, how and why? And another question to throw out, because he's well known, is what role, if any, did Napoleon play in any of this? So to answer these questions, I want to take us back to the 18th century. And first, I'll introduce you to who were the Jews living in France in the 18th century. Well, actually, France had expelled all its Jews. So there should have been no Jews living in France. And actually, France has never readmitted its Jews. So officially and legally, on the books, the Jews are still expelled from France, which occurred in 1394. But at the time of the French Revolution, there were Jews living in France. They were not spread out all over France. There was one community in southwestern France, the Sephardi Jews of Bordeaux and Bayonne. And then there was communities of Ashkenazi Jews in northeastern France. And then there were some Jews living, teeny community, less than 1,000 Jews living in Paris. So what were they all doing there? Well, they were there for different reasons. In Bordeaux, they came in 1550 as Catholics. They were called Nouveaux Chrétiens, New Christians. The king knew that they had been forcibly converted to Catholicism. He knew that they were probably crypto-Jews, but he needed them. He needed them because they had expelled the Protestants and they needed enterprising foreigners. So he allowed the Jews from Portugal, who had fled from Spain and then were forcibly converted, to come to Bordeaux and Bayonne if they chose to, as Nouveaux Chrétiens, as long as they lived as Catholics. And so you had a community of titular Catholics living in Bordeaux for a number of centuries, marrying according to the Catholic faith, burying in a Catholic cemetery, and protecting a kind of crypto-Judaism until 1723, when they actually officially were recognized as a Jewish community. And they chose to officially assert themselves as Jews, in part because it was something they wanted to do, but in part because it protected them more than their being suspected of being crypto-Jews. The Jews of Bordeaux, having lived for a couple of centuries as Catholics, were completely integrated into the cities of Bordeaux and Bayonne. They could own land, they were bankers, they were brokers, they were shippers, they shipped to the United States, they had vineyards, they produced fabulous wine, they sent kosher wine to Europe. The Ashkenazi Jews of Europe were not so sure it was kosher enough, but nevertheless they drank it. They were expected as well to pay significant amount of money for their privileges, which they did. Most important as well, they lived according to non-Jewish law in certain areas like inheritance, and they felt more comfortable and more akin with the non-Jews of Bordeaux than they did with the Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews living in northeastern France. So who are the Ashkenazi Jews living in northeastern France? Well, the reason why there were Jews living there in northeastern France was because France gobbled up Germany's territory, and along with the territory came Jews. And France found itself with Jews living in Metz, in Lorraine, and in Alsace, so in northeastern France. And in Metz, when Metz became part of France, there were, maybe 40 Jewish families. And by the time of the revolution, there were about 400 families. And they, in contrast to the Sephardi Jews, lived in a Jewish quarter, had to dress a particular way. Their clothing was defined for them, and they were very restricted as to what they could do to earn a living. They dealt in used clothing, they made fabulous goose pate, and traded in gold and silver. And then you have the Jews of Alsace. And they were the majority of the Jews in France. And Alsace was a large area with many different individuals who could control the local area. And so Jews were expelled or admitted. In some instances, like in Strasbourg, they were allowed to come in for the day. They had to pay a poll tax, which was the same tax that animals paid, and they had to leave at the end of the day. They were hardly integrated into the non-Jewish population, and because they had so many restrictions as to how they could earn a living, they often lent money, and because the risks were so high, they lent money at very high rates of interest, so they were accused of being usurers. The last community is Paris, and the Jews in Paris had no official existence. They didn't exist, but they were there, of course. And here you have a group under 1,000 of Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardi Jews, wealthy Jews, impoverished foreign Jews, all living in different quartiers of Paris. So that's the situation of the Jews at the time of the French Revolution. Not many of them, not necessarily interacting with each other, and certainly the Sephardi Jews having no desire to be identified with the Ashkenazi Jews. So we come to the eve of the French Revolution. And at this moment in time, there were millenarians, there were humanists, there were men of the Enlightenment who were all considering, what do we do with the Protestants in France, and what do we do with the Jews of France? Do we extend to them more privileges, more rights, and if so, what are the terms? So there was a lot of debate going on before the French Revolution, and it's important because the debates going on before the French Revolution will be retrieved later on by Napoleon. The Enlightenment figures, of course, didn't agree, and some of you may be aware of Voltaire and Rousseau as typical Enlightenment figures. Voltaire thought the Jews were a troop of vile rabble and vagabonds, so he really didn't care for the Jews. Rousseau had nothing against the Jews, but thought their customs and traditions were incompatible with living in France. So neither one was particularly optimistic about welcoming the Jews. I don't want to talk about them. I want to focus on two events leading up to the French Revolution, which give us a sense of how the French were dealing with this vexing problem of what do we do with people who don't have the rights the rest of the people have in the country. Do we welcome them at all, and if so, on what terms, and what are our expectations? Focus on two events quickly. One is called the Malesherbes Commission, named after the minister Malesherbes. And what happened in 1787 was that there was an edict concerning the non-Catholics of France. And this was the work of all of the reformers, the millenarians, and it was specifically for non-Catholics, which meant Protestants. But that didn't mean that the Jews didn't think they were included. They did. And Malesherbes himself thought that the Jews were included in this edict. The Protestants, just as an aside, were as divided as were the Jews. You had the Calvinists in southwestern France, the reverse for the Jews, who were discriminated against, who couldn't live publicly as Protestants, who buried their dead in the middle of the night. so that nobody would notice that they were following a different ritual. And then you had the Protestants of northeastern France, the opposite of the Jews, who were Lutheran, who had lots of privileges. So you can see France was anything but a united country and divided in all sorts of ways. But the edict, the Malesherbes edict, granted to non-Catholics, which everyone presumed included the Jews, a lot of additional rights, which the Jews were in favor of and looking forward to, especially those allowing them to deal in all kinds of trades and to enter the guilds. So the Jews rejoice. This is 1787, and I'll give you a quote from their leader. "It augurs the end of our misfortune and will bring about a striking and considerable revolution." So the Jews began to register their births, their deaths in the civil registers, and they were well on their way to enjoying the benefits of the edict when it came to a screeching halt because the Parliament of Metz refused to ratify the Malesherbes edict unless it specifically excluded the Jews. And the Ashkenazi leadership was devastated. And I'll give you a quote. "The Jew, man like all others, must not only not profit from this generous law, but must become even more degraded by this same law, which in eliminating forever intolerance towards foreigners, continues it especially and only towards the Jew." There were others who were complaining as well. One of my favorites was Zalkin Horowitz, who was a poor Polish Jew who schlepped his way to France just in time for the French Revolution. And as an aside, I loved his wit, his humor. It was so sarcastic that I found myself laughing one day when I read one of his journal articles and decided I would try to write a biography of him. And if you've ever looked for, a needle in a haystack, trying to get the life of a poor, schleppy Polish Jew in the French Revolution, which has huge archives detailing every aspect of the French Revolution. It took me 10 years to write this biography, and but I'm still glad I did it. And Horowitz, decried the discrimination against Frenchmen who did not understand that 3 makes 1, i.e. Catholicism Trinity makes 1. So he was poking fun already in 1787 at France and the church. In any event, once it was clear that the Malesherbes edict didn't apply to the Jews, Malesherbes announced that the king had made him a Protestant, now he was making him a Jew, and he was going to have to figure out what to do with the Jews of France. And so the minister Malesherbes threw himself into the task. He wrote all these various rulers all over Europe to ask them how they treated the Jews. He acquired a huge library about everything to do with the Jews, all with the question, were the Jews able to become members of the body politic? Could they actually become, he wouldn't use the word citizens so much, but equal to others in France? Or were they a people apart? Were they not only a nation within the nation, but a nation within all nations? And Malesherbes just didn't know the answer. And he had trouble because when he went to the Jews to ask them questions, he had an Ashkenazi Jew and a Sephardi Jew, David Gradis and Surf Bear. He asked them a simple question, will you eat with non-Jews? And Gradis said, yes, of course. And Surf Bear said, absolutely not. So there was no uniform response, which led Malesherbes to even be more perplexed. He was overwhelmed with the difficulty of providing the king with a memorandum concerning the Jews, and he never got around to doing it. Would he have advised an edict for the Jews comparable to the one for the Protestants? Well, the Jews have perpetuated a memory that he would. And the Jews of France remember Malesherbes very happily. But I got into the archives of the Malesherbes family, which is actually the de Tocqueville family. It was a kind of sneaky way I got in. And I was shocked to read what he actually thought. And there is no way he would have put through an edict protecting the Jews, not with this. And I'll read you one of his statements. Those who controlled the nation, the rich or the religious, appear deceitful and cunning. He also believed, in another part where he wrote about his having to deal with the Jews, that the Jews, if the Jews were to have their own country, and now I'm quoting, this nation will become even more dangerous. So Mauser wasn't going to issue an edict. However, the Jews remember him as having done so. And even Isaac Ber, who is quite active during Malesherbes' time, a quarter century later, and now I'm quoting, suggested to the Jews of France that they honor the memory of the virtuous Malesherbes, who had been the first to obtain their civil liberty for the Jews. So something happens to the memory, and we'll see that that same something happens to the memory of Napoleon vis-a-vis the Jews. One other event I want to focus on before we finally get to the French Revolution is the Metz Academy and its contest, which was announced in 1787. Are there means to make the Jews more useful and happy in France? And the Metz Academy each year would have a question, and then it would throw it out to the public, and people would write essays, sometimes very long essays. They were read and they were judged, and then it was a big deal if you won a prize from the Metz Academy answering whatever question was asked that year. So they put this out, they got a number of entries, and the judges found them all to be somewhat mediocre. So they postponed the contest for a year, sent the question out again, and said, please do some more work before you send in your essay. Some people sent in essays for the first time this second round. Others changed their essays a bit. The judges were still iffy as to whether any one of them stood out, so very ecumenically, they decided to award the prize to 3 of the entries: a Polish Jew, Zalkin Horowitz, a priest, the Abbé Grégoire, and a Protestant, Auguste Thierry. So it was ecumenical. And all 3 of them, the priest, the Protestant, and of course Zalkin Horowitz, felt that the conditions that the Jews were living under were unacceptable, and the Jews' tolerance should be extended to the Jews. But there was a big difference, because for Grégoire and Thierry, the Catholic and the Protestant, the Jews needed to be regenerated, they needed to be improved, and there was a presumption in their essays that Christianity was superior to Judaism. Whereas Zalkin Horowitz, and I'll just quote him and you'll get the feeling for him, the means to make the Jews happy and useful. You see what he's done? The Metz Academy said how to make the Jews useful and happy. Horowitz says how to make the Jews happy and useful. Here it is, he says, cease to make them unhappy and useless in giving them, or rather returning to them, the rights of citizenship. Have we such an abundance of time and enlightenment that we can prostitute them in the investigation of foolishness and barbarity? So this schleppy Polish Jew who was dealing in used clothing was able to make some very strong arguments in the journals. Now we finally come to the French Revolution. So at the moment of the French Revolution, you can see there was a lot of discussion and debate publicly surrounding this teeny minority of Jews who they weren't even dispersed throughout France. But there was a lot of discussion and debate, because what do you do with a people or a group, or in some instances they were called a tribe, that lives apart and yet wants to become part of the body politic? So the revolution breaks out by a call for the Estates General, and that's the first step in the revolution. And as you can imagine, I could ask you, do you think the Sephardim of Bordeaux and the Ashkenazim of Alsace and Metz are treated the same way at the time of the revolution? Of course not. The Sephardim of Bordeaux voted for who would be members of the Estates General. One of the Sephardi Jews almost won the election, David Gradis, and they were seen to be included. The Ashkenazi Jews were completely excluded from anything to do with voting for the Estates General, which is step 1 in the revolution. Within a couple of months, the States General fell apart, a National Assembly was proclaimed, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, taken from our own declaration in the United States, was proclaimed. And it's a sentence, but it is a very heady sentence. All men, They mean that literally, unfortunately. All men are born and remain free and equal in rights. No person shall be molested for his opinions, even such as are religious. So in this proclamation, your religious identity is your opinion, but your humanness, your being a man, is what guarantees your inclusion in the body politic. Very heady statement. They really didn't think it through. They had no idea whom they were really going to include, but they made the statement, and Lafayette was pretty important in influencing them to do so. So how are the Jews going to respond to this? Well, the Sephardi Jews chose to remain silent because they assumed they were included with all men. They were men. The Ashkenazi Jews sent a petition adding civil rights to what they wanted in this new entity called France, but they did not want to give up their autonomy as an autonomous body, the Ashkenazi Jews. And their autonomy meant juridical autonomy. It meant they had their rabbis, their courts of law, they lived according to Jewish law. They still wanted that. They wanted the protection of having their own community, which was out of sync, to say the least, with what the revolutionaries were thinking, but they nevertheless proposed it. And only the Jews of Paris were attuned to what was really going on. The few Jews living in Paris, under 1,000, including Zalk and Horowitz, absolutely understand what the revolution was about, and so they said, quote, very straightforward sentence, "We are French. We demand to be subject to French jurisprudence, French police, and French tribunals." So here you have, at the time of the French Revolution, the Sephardi Jews silent because they're going to be included, the Ashkenazi Jews wanting to hold on to the privileges of the Ancien Regime, which protected them in their mind, and the Jews of Paris becoming radicalized and revolutionary. So you have no unity among the Jews of France. So what happens? Well, with the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, the French realized they had made a statement and they really didn't know whom they were going to include. And so there are debates that you can read. You have these tomes of the debates in September, October, November, December, as to who was included in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. And I'll tell you who was excluded initially, or at least not included: executioners, actors, Protestants, and Jews. The revolutionaries weren't clear on any of these groups. And so the debates went back and forth and back and forth. And let me give you an example of one debate by quoting two individuals, one who thought the Jews should be included and one who thought that they should not. This is the Bishop of Nancy in northeastern France, de la Fare, who has this to say: France cannot and should not admit to its family a tribe whose religion, customs, physical and moral regulations differ profoundly from those of all other people. A tribe whose eyes turn incessantly toward a homeland which will one day reunite all its dispersed members, and which perforce cannot commit itself to the land in which it dwells. That's a pretty powerful statement. And you had an argument that was made in the opposite direction by Clément Tonnerre. His response was eloquent, and unfortunately it's clipped now in history books, so they forget the last sentence, which is only a few words. So I'll stop, and then I'll read the last sentence, and you'll see that poor Clément Tonnerre has gotten bad press, but he shouldn't. We must refuse everything to the Jews as a nation. We must grant everything to them as individuals. So this is the beginning of how, for the first time ever in Europe, Jews are going to be welcomed. We must grant everything to them as individuals. We must cease to recognize their judges, for they shall have only ours. We must refuse them the protection of their own laws. It is necessary that they be neither a political body nor an order. But we have to remember that all of the orders had been destroyed in the French Revolution. All of the corporations were undone and no longer existed. So he was making an argument that we can't treat the Jews differently. They can't be an order if there are no orders now. We have individuals who are all part of the nation of France. Only as individuals can they be citizens. But one will say they do not want to be citizens. Ah, well, if that is what they want and they express it, then they must be expelled. It is repugnant that there be in the state a society of non-citizens and a nation within the nation, period. That's where it usually ends. But there was another sentence in what he said, but they do not speak of this. So he was arguing to include them, acknowledging that the Jews were willing to accept the terms, that their Judaism was a religious opinion. Well, the debates went on, and finally actors were welcomed, executioners were welcomed, Protestants were welcomed, and guess what? The Jews were not. 5 votes made the difference between welcoming the Jews and not welcoming the Jews. And I, as an aside, at the time of the bicentennial, I was giving a lecture in a synagogue, and I happened to, as an aside, mention that, you know, their emancipation was not a simple thing, and it hung on 5 votes making the difference at a very early stage in the revolution, and the audience gasped. And I thought that wasn't such a major statement that I made, that they should gasp, and then it turned out that their rabbi had been renewed by a vote of 5. So 5 votes made the difference too. So for the couple of things as a result of all this, for the first time in France, all the Jews were now united. Nobody was making a distinction between the Sephardi Jews of Bordeaux and Bayonne, the Jews of Metz, Lorraine, and Alsace, and the Jews of Paris. They were lumped together for the first time, which did not sit well with the Sephardi Jews. Also, the important questions had been raised. Who were the Jews? How were they going to define themselves? Were they willing to give up the protection of juridical autonomy and corporate autonomy for admission to the body politic? Or were they not? And if not, what would you do with them? Would you expel them? Would you just treat them differently as a kind of different order of humanness? The debates were left unanswered for the time. We're now in December of 1789, coming into January of 1790. What do you think the position of the Sephardi Jews would be? They were furious. And they could not let this rest, and they lobbied ferociously. And one of their very close friends, of course, was Lafayette. And he promised he would help them. And tomorrow I'm going to ask a question about Lafayette, and I know Hamilton is playing here, so it has to do with Lafayette and George Washington, but I won't ask it tonight. In any event, the Sephardi Jews successfully lobbied. They came to Paris. They dined with various members of the National Assembly. They tried to get the Ashkenazi Jews to dine with them, but the Ashkenazi Jews wouldn't dine with them because it wasn't kosher. And so they dismissed any working with the Ashkenazi Jews. And they separated their plea for inclusion from that of the Ashkenazi. And let me quote their request to the National Assembly. Could the ill-considered requests of some Jews from Alsace and Lorraine, who enjoyed almost no advantages, deprive us of rights we already possess? So they were arguing that we possess these rights. We are already integrated. We are already acculturated. We are already members of the body politic. You have to accept us. You have to acknowledge that we're different. So they won. And on January 28, 1790, they won their enfranchisement as full members of the body politic, as active citizens of France for the first time ever, ever, ever. Jews are welcomed as citizens, but only the Sephardi Jews living in southwestern France. But along with it came the explicit acknowledgement that the Jews of the Southwest could in no way prejudice granting citizenship to the rest of the Jews of France. So citizenship was awarded the Sephardi Jews, explicitly excluding the rest of the Jews of France. And the journals reported it, and I'll quote you one sentence from one of the journals. "The vote, 20 times begun amid cries and tumult in an atmosphere likened to a synagogue, was finally tallied at 374 in favor of the Sephardim against 224. So it was somewhat close. This was the first time in history that the Jews were granted such rights. And it left the majority of the Jews of France where? Nowhere. In the anteroom of society with the revolution going on. And here you have the vast majority of Jews in France waiting to find out how they would be, if they would be, under what terms could they be included in this French state. So I'm going to stop with this because I would like to open it up for questions. And I don't know how we're doing. Do we have time for some questions, Peter? Good, good. Yes. Yeah, I think actually in the minds of most, I mean, corporateness was a big deal because corporateness meant the church. And the church was disbanded during this early period. And the clergy were going to be paid by the state. And there was no such thing as the aristocracy, which was destroyed during the French Revolution. So corporateness, this entity of being apart, was anathema to the revolutionaries. What they wanted was a body politic which was inclusive, but everyone as individuals. And so it was less the Jews looking towards Palestine and more the fact that they lived according to their own laws. And the Ashkenazi Jews didn't want to give that up. They did not want to give up living according to their laws and the Beit Din and a corporateness which protected them. So it was really the distinctiveness. And when the edict for the non-Catholics was issued, Malesherbes made sure that the Lutherans, who were protected as a corporation, would not necessarily lose their corporation, but under no circumstances could the Calvinists, who now had rights that they never enjoyed before, emerge as a corporation. So corporateness was the negative, the distinctiveness of a particular group. And the question was, are the Jews always going to be distinct with their customs, their traditions, their laws? And you'll see that Napoleon asks them the same questions. After the revolution finally welcomes all the Jews, which is tomorrow, you'll see that Napoleon walks the Jews right back to this period and this moment to make them prove it again that they're going to be Frenchmen. And so that becomes part of the self-identity of the Jews of France. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Who was the actual leader that made all these determinations and wound up?
The leader among the Jews?
No, the French.
The French. Oh, it's the National Assembly. It's the Estates General that was that the king convened an Estates General to deal with France was broke because France had helped the Americans fight their revolution. France was broke. And there were a lot of grievances going on in France. And so the king convened an Estates General, which hadn't met in a long time, asked everyone to write their cahier de doléances, their notebook of grievances, so they could be addressed. And the king was presuming that the estates would get together, the aristocracy, the church, the third estate, and they would address their grievances and move on. But that didn't happen. Revolution was in the air. The Enlightenment had infected a lot of people. And so rather than go along with the king, the Estates General became a national assembly, the storming of the Bastille, and so it goes on. So the people, I'm not quite sure what you're asking about. Who was the
first to lead the revolution?
The Third Estate was the first, and members of the Third Estate. And then if you want me to throw out revolutionaries' names, eventually Danton, Condorcet, Robespierre emerge. But this is a little bit later on. This is at the very beginning, and the revolution becomes more and more and more radical. And it becomes more and more radical in part because of who's emerging as a leader, and it becomes more and more radical because others fled. The nobles fled France, the church was absolutely disbanded, and the clergy now they were paid by the state. So, and the aristocracy didn't exist anymore. Finito. So France was creating a nation and trying to define what that nation was. And here you have the Jews waiting in the anteroom, and this is partly an answer to Manuel Valls. Without, the Jews, the French Republic doesn't exist anymore. Because we'll see when they're finally admitted that it was very explicitly stated that the Constitution, if they meant what they meant, could not exclude the Jews.
We're going to make this the last question. This will be the last hors d'oeuvre before dinner.
Thank you very much. You opened my eyes to things I never even thought about, and in such a short period of time, it was amazing. But one thing came to my mind. It seems like by not accepting the Jews with them using their own laws, the French, the powers to be, found that very objectionable. And at first blush,
let me just interrupt for 1 second. Don't forget that they weren't letting anyone else have their own laws.
Well, that was part of my question, because I'm happy to hear that, because it almost sounded anti-Semitic, but it isn't. It seemed to me a very reasonable thing.
Absolutely,
And
it was very reasonable.
We have it in our own country. If Muslims want to live here, we don't want to have, what's the law there?
The
Sharia law.
Right,
it's very.
They can't live according to Sharia law and be citizens of the United States.
You got it, okay.
No, the French were not being anti-Semitic. It doesn't mean that there weren't in the atmosphere a lot of what we would call anti-Semitic views and hostilities and whatever. But that's not what's motivating these revolutionaries. What's really motivating them is they just don't know who these Jews are, and the Jews themselves differed in their statements. The Sephardi Jews were making a very different statement from the Ashkenazi Jews. And the Ashkenazi Jews were correct in that once they were welcomed as citizens and were no longer a corporation, there was anarchy. Because they owed a lot of money because they had to pay for privileges, and they owed it collectively as a Jewish community. And once they were no longer recognized as a collective Jewish community, how do you get people to pay up? You don't.
It is my unpleasant duty to say we have a dinner coming up. This is probably more exciting. And I also have the responsibility to encourage you strongly. Go right into the social hall. I know you want to take a half an hour and say hello to your friends and socialize and all of that. Let me walk in there first. Don't start eating until we have our kiddush and say the appropriate things we're supposed to say. And trying to get people from one room to another may be a skill that middle school principals have, but I don't have. So, good Shabbos. And